Thank you all for being here. It's our last xTalk for this term, so very excited to be here. And just to let you know, my name is Jovi, for those of you who haven't met me yet. I'm Learning Science and Education Outreach Specialist with the residential education team at Open Learning. And today's xTalk, quick note first, if we are recording, I think everyone's okay where you are, but just stay where you are unless you want your back of your head in the recording here. Today's xTalk is all about reflecting on teaching and learning with technology through the past term as well as the past academic year, which is now coming to a close. And a little bit about this xTalk and topic. So I shared a couple of prompts with Adam that I'm sure he's going to take and run with. That's more about what are some experiences this term with teaching with technology and some of the positive experiences, and what are some things that could potentially be improved or continue to be improved. How do you know when and what to improve in terms of teaching and learning? And so I'm very excited because Adam Martin is our speaker here today. And he is a professor of biology. He teaches 706, 7016, 7002, and 7102. He's also an undergraduate officer and a recently named Margaret MacVicar Faculty Fellow. So with that, I'll hand it over to Professor Martin.
Thank you, Jovi. So I've been asked to reflect on this past term and also kind of talk about what my thoughts are for next year. All right, I wanted to thank a bunch of people who are really critical to the education process, many of whom are here in this room. For 7016, our current instructor is Moni Aveo, and she's been fantastic, kind of basically running the technology and alerting me to what is available, and it's really great to work with her. For 7002, which is a lab course, I work with Vanessa and Eric, who are here in the room, and they are also fantastic. And for 7102, I work with Mandana Sasanfar, who's our outreach coordinator in the biology department. And then I also want to recognize some people that I just generally sort of have interacted with quite a bit. Mary Ellen Wiltrout, who's here, has been a big push for me to kind of adopt new technologies and experiment. And so working with her over the years, I think we started working together in 2015. So we've been kind of experimenting over the years, and that's been a lot of fun. And Darcy Gordon, who is also here, has been fantastic to bounce ideas off of and to work with. Also, I wanted to thank some of my faculty colleagues who have been really influential. I taught with Barbara Imperiali, who is also a MacVicar Faculty Fellow, and we did 7016 for many years together, and I learned a lot from her. For 706, when I taught with Frank Solomon for many years, and he was also a tremendous colleague. And now my new colleague in 7016 is Professor Sinisha Irvatin, and he is hitting the ground running, so to speak. He's a fantastic person to work with, and I'm already learning from him, even though it's his first time teaching. So I thought I'd start with kind of the most obvious thing, which is the video capture technology. I'm sure everyone already knows about this, so I'm just going to just skim it. I just wanted to point to this article that came out in the Wall Street Journal. And Benjamin, who is pictured here, took our course remotely from San Diego during the term. And he did fantastic. He was one of our top students. And him taking our course that year would not have been possible. This was 2021, 22. So it was spring 22. And this is obviously a game changer and a terrific bonus. But one thing that I wanted to talk about is this introduced a bit of attention on the residential side, because students knew we were taping. They knew they know there are videos available, and they would constantly ask for the videos, hoping to not attend class, or often, one thing we've seen a lot of is students will double book classes and want to sort of be in both classes that meet at the same time, which seems like a bit of a perverse incentive in terms of just time management. So that's been something that we've seen as a bit of a problem with our course, which obviously is a GIR, it's required, and involves hundreds of students. So we had to figure out how to get around this. And this year, we came to the following policy where we would make the videos available to students one day before a problem set deadline. If there's a valid excuse, then we would grant immediate access to any lecture video. But I think what our biggest change this year was, which really worked well, is to allow for 3 freebies, sort of unexcused video accesses. And this policy kind of was put in place with Moni together with one of our undergrad TAs from a past semester, Amelia. And this seems to have worked very well. We're getting a lot fewer sort of Canvas requests for videos. Just, like in 21-22, there's kind of this drumbeat of like, we know you have the videos, why are you not releasing them to us? And it was even disruptive, I would say. And this year, it's been much better. And we've only had 6 students basically use up all of the freebies. The other way that we encourage students to come to lecture is basically what I did for you all when you came in. We are playing music in the lecture room as students come in, but there's a purpose to it. It's basically a musical engagement game. And so can anyone tell me what the music I played has to do with today's lecture or today's talk? Anyone know what the music was? What's that?
Hopefully this is logical.
Yes, logical, pedagogical, yeah. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we're not going to be a fanatical criminal, but we're, So basically what we'll do is we'll play music, and we're taking advantage of the speakers of our room, which is 26100. And it's fun because the students come in, they immediately like kind of perk up. And they're trying to figure out what the song is. I'm sure a lot of them are using Shazam. But some of them actually have commented on like, oh, I love that artist. I love that song. And then they'll like, send emails afterwards. But I guess the pedagogical part of it is I try to make, we've been making every song have to do with something in lecture. And I'm usually trying to make it the most important point in the lecture. So one example would be for immunology and the adaptive immune system, I use Kenny Rogers, The Gambler, because I will make in class the analogy between sort of like lymphocyte development and a cell getting dealt a hand of cards, because that's how they randomly sort of get the different antigen receptors that will give rise to sort of adaptive immunity. So I try to target like what I really want them to focus in on. And I've even had students tell me like after they've taken the exam, they've said, oh, like I remembered the song, and I like then remembered like what the answer was basically that we were getting at. So that's been fun. And also it's a competition. And this is good advice I got from Kathy Drennan from her TA training, who said that if you make it a competition, then you get the maximum engagement from the students. So the recitations are competing against each other to see who can guess the most connections between the songs and the topics in lecture. And this has been fun because they're kind of engaging with each other, they're engaging with the instructor, and so we've also kind of energized them as they come in. Some other small things that aren't really like that technologically advanced, but I have found to be super helpful are just Google Docs and planning sort of software like Calendly. This has provided a way to kind of like manage my schedule and be able to I think, sort of like engage and interact with students and set up meeting times with them in a very sort of easy way. In fact, I've had like other faculty trying to get in touch with a student, and I'll send the student a Calendly link, and I'll immediately have them sign up for a meeting, and like, they'll never get back to the other faculty member. You know, it's just like the low barrier to sort of, and also it's personal because like before I'd have my admin sort of try to set up all my meetings. Now I can email them all individually, send them a Calendly link. They just click on a button, they get on my calendar. And this has been really useful for advising and for students who are struggling in the class who want to set up a one-on-one meeting. Also, you know, over the years, I've really dabbled in trying to figure out how to get students to show up for office hours. And I think this year I finally have like arrived at something that at least works better than what I was doing before. And what I do is I have a Google Doc that has a sign-up sheet, so they can sign up and see who else is signing up. And I think that kind of feeds into a little bit of peer pressure, or at least it relieves the fear of them showing up and being the only one sort of like present in the room with me. I found that to be, there's been like a pretty big difference between this year and last year in terms of students willing to come, and they like come in groups. I've also found it helpful like on these documents to really kind of like define like what the role of these things are and what my role is. So you can see here in this document, this is actually for my advisees. But I basically have a little introduction to myself. I tell them why they should meet with me rather than use another resource. So I am different from students because I have a lot of different expertise and experiences that your peer students aren't likely to have. And I find this has been useful because I just send out a link to sort of like any student who's kind of like in my orbit, and they can kind of like see this, they can sign up on the calendar. And that's just, for me, it's been better in terms of managing my life, but I feel like it also has made students more willing to sort of come and approach me. One thing, you know, I kind of have a pet peeve about is kind of like being a professor and having a family. And, you know, one thing about the pandemic and having to teach remotely and like really figuring out how to do it and do it well has been like, I see how much better this would have been like for me when my kids were small to have that option. Right, so here are some pictures of my youngest son, who I would cart to campus for review sessions at night. And you know, it's maybe not the easiest thing to have a 5-year-old in your review session as you're sort of going through cell biology. I'm not sure if that might have been outside our regular curriculum, but I guess he was learning about cell types. Another thing I've discovered this semester is that like I'm not perfect, right? I was teaching stuff for the first time this semester, like material for the first time. And sometimes like I screw it up or I forget like how overwhelming it is for the students. And so like a short Zoom recording summary, if I feel like I've like overwhelmed them, is a great supplement to kind of like what we're already providing. And I like that as a way, and also if I like talk to students in office hours, right? Like I find out immediately what I screwed up. And then I'm like, oh, I like forgot that part that's like, to me was totally intuitive. Right now I can go back, make a quick Zoom recording, goes right to Panopto. And it really, I think, is an effective way to kind of like, you know, like target things that maybe they didn't get that you realize after the fact. They should really know. So I want to tell a little bit about our experience with polling this year. In particular, I want to talk about how we used it in sort of a more ethics-oriented class that we did in 7016, where we basically were trying to really push the students to think about, you know, what is appropriate in terms of, we did both in vitro fertilization and also genome editing for humans. And so we asked these poll questions to them. When do you think it would be appropriate to edit a gene in a human embryo? And the second one is more science-y. And what are the worries that some of them have about gene editing? And so this was really interesting for me because I've done stuff like this without polling. And I feel like we got pretty honest answers with the polling in a way that there was a small but consistent fraction of students that really thought they should have control over the traits of their kids. And that's something that really didn't come out necessarily in class in past lectures, but you could see it in the poll data as it was coming out. I've had students come up to me after lecture in private and say, I really want to pick the traits of my kids, but I've never, in class, right, everyone could see that there's people in class who really felt like they should be able to give their child a higher IQ with some genome editing technology. So I thought it gave a more honest representation to all the students about where the range of opinion is on this. And so I thought that was a nice thing to see, and I'm hoping in the future we get to discuss these things more in class, and I'll tell you about how I'm thinking of that next. So just to summarize, some of the things that I think will definitely continue is our lecture recording policies. With those policies, it's really kind of like a Goldilocks principle. You're trying to kind of optimize it. And it has to be just right, otherwise there's a lot of pushback from the students. I definitely like the Google Doc and sort of the Calendly, being able to kind of create the lowest possible barrier to students signing up to meet with you. And the polling is definitely also useful. So one thing that I'm excited about is we didn't really have the time this year to really kind of engage with ChatGPT, but I'm excited to work with it and discuss it with the students in coming years. And one idea I had, and I wanted to give a shout out to the May issue of the MIT Technology Review, which had a series of articles on AI and ChatGPT in the classroom. I read through that, and I think some of these ideas, I was having them and then I was reading them, so it was good reinforcement. I think it would be interesting to use ChatGPT to kind of almost engage the students in debate. In fact, right before this, I was on ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT to give me an essay on why I should be able to choose the traits of my kids. And so I think it could be an interesting way. I don't know that students are going to be willing to kind of voice that opinion in front of 200 people, but if it's ChatGPT, I think we could use that to kind of think about the arguments and engage the students in that way, which I think could be an interesting. Also, there's thinking about bias in terms of credit. I also asked ChatGPT, tell me sort of the history of vaccination. And of course, it starts with Edward Jenner in England, and so there's a European bias to they left out all of the sort of past work that's variolation that was happening in China, Africa, South Asia. So I think it's good to engage the students on these topics as well. And then the last thing that I keep playing around with and am getting more emboldened to try, I think, is really trying a flipped classroom. And I don't know that I would do it for the entire class, but maybe a few targeted lectures to try to see if we can do more active learning exercises like this one. This one over here, I get probably 46 students up to reenact mitosis and meiosis with swim noodles. And that I think is an engaging activity for them to really kind of think about biology in a very physical way, which is important for understanding the concepts. And that's it. So I'll open it up for questions. I don't know where I read it, but it was either in the technology review or the faculty newsletter. One of my colleagues had interesting ideas on how to do this. He was saying he had like a Google form or something that they had to fill out to like kind of like show that they had engaged with the material, and then they had part of their grade based on that. It was actually a substantial part of the grade too. It's poll everywhere. So no, it's not clickers. It's on the computer. They pretty much always have a computer, yeah. Or the device, their phone, I think also works, yeah.
One thing I'm wondering, kind of going off of the question earlier about incentivizing, you know, watching pre-recorded things so you come to class prepared. You're thinking about potentially doing a flipped classroom or some version of it. And when you're thinking through, you know, what that means going forward, like how do you decide, you know, when to implement it or how to go about implementing it, you know, and those decision points? Could you just share a little bit more about your thinking on that?
Yeah, so I'm an experimental biologist. So we changed a lot this year, so we didn't change that, right? So I'm trying to change like one or a couple of variables at a time, and then we see how it goes. And then at the end of the semester, we kind of collect data, we assess how it went, and then decide whether to like continue. So my feeling is that we don't like just like tip everything over and like totally rearrange it, but we take like a few lectures that we think are most important to flip. We flip them, we see how the students engage, and then we sort of like continue. One thing I'm thinking for that, right? I think, and also just engaging like beforehand in general. I think one thing that we have to think carefully about is just, I'm a little hesitant just to release a lecture I did like from a past year because it might be not entirely focused on what I want. So I think releasing maybe like short bursts or short segments, which are really sort of going for the jugular on what you want them to know, could be an effective way to do it, right? If it's like, you know, and Mary Ellen and I have done this for 706 cell biology. We would have a series of videos called experiments in cell biology, and they probably didn't top 10 minutes. Most of them are like right around 5 minutes. They're right to the point. And so I could see sort of like, you know, developing like a series of short segments where we tell the students like, look, we are like, you know, really focusing on exactly what we want you to know. And like you put in this work will save you time in the long run, because we won't be giving like a 50-minute lecture on it. You'll be able to watch like 4 10-minute like segments at 10x speed and then come in and engage, and like we're good to go. Yeah, I think for the lecture recordings, because now we have a lot of material and like together, like potentially some of that can be used. But to be like, I'm terrified of public speaking. And like, if I didn't have to give a lecture and I could just like record like a few 10-minute segments, that would be much easier on me. And I would like totally be like, okay with that. So like, I actually think it wouldn't be all that bad to make that transition. If I didn't have to like come in and like make sure I'm right about everything for like 50 minutes, like every other day, I would like appreciate that. Yeah, so we'll have to have some type of material, either I guess through like interactions with the instructional staff, or something that's more kind of like question answer, sort of online style. No, but that's a great point. That's something I think I need to think more about.
Follow up to that on that note. Thinking about, you know, whether the engagement is actually doing what it needs to do, whether your students are taking away those key points that you're trying to emphasize, like beyond grades, right? Like how else are you getting data or information on like from these different tools or strategies in terms of how things are going.
You're saying kind of like distinguishing like the effects of like different strategies?
Right, and like the overall, objective of like the course.
Yeah.
Instead of like the individual activity itself, but also like in the bigger picture of like how it's working out, and are they taking away everything you hoped for in the class? And like how do you get that feel for that?
Yeah, well, one thing that we're also thinking about is how to really target the assessments to like get at like the big sort of concepts that we want. Now, outside of like just the assessments, I mean, for me, like personally, right, like I get a lot sometimes just out of speaking with students in office hours, and like you can tell like what they've like gotten just by asking them a few questions. And whether that's something for a class our size, I don't know that it's feasible for us to have oral exams for everybody, but maybe we could use the recitations a little bit along that. So if you have the TA kind of discussing things with the students, and I mean there's the assessment grade, right? But then in the end, right, all the teaching staff decides where the breakpoints are. And so if we notice a student who in recitation, the TA is like, wow, they really knew what they're doing, they're just not a good test taker, right? We can factor that into their overall grade.
Yeah, in a way, it sounds like in a way getting to know like the students and where they are individually also is helpful.
Yeah.
Like the lowering the barriers to getting to office hours, I imagine, is helpful in that regard
it helps
too.
me because I know what I screwed up. Yeah. It's a very useful. It wasn't so technologically advanced, but we just go out and run, and that has been a lot of fun. So, yeah, it's a way like I don't know, like I did this and thought like it would tank, and it really caught on. And the only reason I can think of is that students are unwilling to meet with me. Like they're unwilling just to meet with me, but if they are meeting with me and also getting exercise, then they're multitasking. And like that's MIT, right? Like they're like, so that has really, that's really been, it's been fun I've had students straight out tell me like, I never would have engaged with a faculty member like unless you had this. So I'm like, okay, but why wouldn't you engage beforehand? So it almost seems like it's like an increased barrier, but it's actually not. Yeah. I think my number one piece of advice to junior faculty who are starting is to be themselves. I've learned very quickly that I could not teach like my senior colleagues because it just like they're from a different generation, they do different things, and it did not play at all to my strengths. And so I had to, after one semester where I think one of the student evaluations I had was, yeah, Professor Martin might one day be a good professor. That and I should pretend to know everything. Really kind of like, and I didn't follow that advice. But I felt like I had to kind of adopt a strategy that was true to myself. Because I am an experimental biologist, I am very willing to play around with things and like see if they improve or not. So that in that sense, like I'm basically just doing kind of what comes naturally to me. But it's still in my office. I've tried like donut hours. I have tried like just about everything. I was like, it's a problem is it's in my office. I call them office hours, but then I like define them. I say like, here's what you can do, right? Like you can show up and like do your problem set and like not talk to me at all. You can show up and like with a bunch of friends and like talk to me about like the class. You can talk to me about your career interests. And so I tried to lay out for them to kind of stretch their imaginations as to like, what could we use office hours for? Oh yeah. Yeah. Usually they like to be, usually what they want to do is they want to be there and listen to what someone else is doing.
I just want to emphasize how you sort of define like the range of ideas that you can do in office hours, and the fact that it can be group work as being super important, right? Because because of that sort of, you know, maybe stigma that office hours has, right, for students of like, oh, you go there if you're like done something bad or like, you know, don't want to admit that you need help or whatever it may be, like being afraid of that, sort of having that visible and like very plainly stated that like, here's what it could be for, like it's okay to just come and like sit there, and that's been done and that's cool, you know? I think is really great. And like, if you don't want to ask questions and someone else is asking something that's already been on your mind the whole time, right? Like that I think is very, very beneficial. But like just, again, having stated that, I think is really is really important. And I think that that's great to hear that it's used in those other ways.
Yeah, I challenged my first year advisees to go to at least one office hours for their first semester. And yeah, I don't know that they actually do it, but I kind of like say like, here's my challenge to you, do this. But I like the idea of incentivizing sort of like one. I try to entice them in other ways. Like I have an insect collection in my office, and I'll say, if you want to come see my insect collection, like it's really cool. Or like I'll say something like that's like kind of like I'll hint at some story like about me, and I'll say, if you want to hear more about this, like I'd be happy to like, you know, tell you like in office hours or something like that. And yeah, that does attract some of them. Actually, the insects are quite enticing to some undergrads, which is somewhat surprising. They're more enticing than the donuts. Yeah. Well, so our students are really curious, so, and health conscious, Yeah, so I have tried to memorize every student in my class's name. That's hard, because there's 240. But another thing that I do, which I bet I can pull up quickly, is when I introduce myself at the beginning of the semester, I show a picture of me in my dorm room from when I was their age. I tell them, like, this is me when I was your age. And I tell them also, this is my kind of like hook for the music, because if I wasn't a scientist, I would have been a musician. So I explain that to them, and I explain to them that the guy in the white t-shirt on the right is now working for the US Patent Office in the chemistry department, and the person who took this picture is an anesthesiologist. And so just to give them kind of a sense as to like, you know, where like we came from. I don't know about it, but this sounds fascinating. One thing that Eric and Vanessa do over here for our lab courses, they have them, it's not virtual reality, but they kind of have the students play with the structures in PyMol and do that sort of thing. Yeah, but yeah, we show a lot of videos, but we haven't yet gone the virtual reality route. For me personally, like I feel like I think a lot of the things that I like to kind of impart in lecture are things that have been important for my own kind of development, right? Like, you know, for me, like running is essential, and music is also essential, and it's also like very useful, like in a stressful, and this is what I use to like combat stress and to like be productive. And so I feel like I'm just kind of like passing it on to the students, who discovered this. I had one student from 2018 who joined my running office hours, and he's been in grad school and under a huge amount of stress. And he told me that he emailed me like 6 months ago, told me he ran a marathon and that he was competing in full triathlons. I was like, whoa, like he's using that to kind of get through tough times. So I think for me personally, that's probably what I get the most out of it, right? I mean, I think for me, kind of passing that wisdom on, just being an undergrad was hard on me. And so I feel like I'm just kind of trying to, pass on sort of information and tools that were useful for me to them. I mean, I love teaching biology. I love music, and I love introducing people to music. I love introducing people to running, and so I get a lot of joy out of all those things, right? I mean, before lectures, I used to just listen to something on my headphones to get ready for lecture. Now I've just made it public. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're just about at time. So just want to say thank you again, Professor Martin, for being here to talk with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you very much.